My name is Julia Simmons. I'm 41 years old, a school teacher living in Columbus, Ohio. I never thought I'd ever make a video like this. Honestly, even speaking these words out loud still gives me chills. But after everything I've been through, I know I have to share what happened. Not long ago, my life was completely normal. I was teaching 3rd grade at a local elementary school, loving my students, and looking forward to summer break. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. I suffered a sudden cardiac arrest in my classroom. For a few terrifying minutes, my heart stopped, and I found myself somewhere far beyond this world. What I experienced during those moments, what I saw and heard, shook me to my core. But it also filled me with a hope and an urgency I cannot ignore. That's why I'm here speaking to you now. If you're watching this, please listen with an open mind and an open heart. I'm not here to argue or debate. I just need you to hear my story, because I believe it's a warning and a promise. If my story moves you, leave a like and share your thoughts below. Let's prepare together for what's coming. The day everything changed. It was just another ordinary Tuesday, or at least it started that way. I remember it so clearly. The air felt heavy that morning, almost electric, but I dismissed it as just another storm rolling in over Columbus. My husband, Michael, kissed me goodbye, and I drove to the school humming along to my favorite playlist. In the staff lounge, my coworkers and I laughed about lesson plans and field trips. There was nothing to suggest that my entire reality was about to shatter. I started my day teaching fractions to a room full of lively 3rd graders. Around midday, as the kids headed to lunch, I noticed a strange tightness in my chest. I brushed it off. Too much coffee, I thought. But then, a wave of dizziness crashed over me. The lights in the hallway flickered. My vision blurred. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, fighting to stay upright, forcing a shaky smile for a student who'd forgotten her lunchbox. And then, everything went silent. No voices, no sounds of children laughing, nothing. The world seemed to slow down, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, mixed with a strange kind of fear. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. I could feel my heart pounding erratically in my chest, a rapid drumbeat that suddenly just stopped. In those final seconds of consciousness, 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind. My husband, my parents, the students I cared for so deeply. I remember thinking, this can't be how it ends. Not now. Not like this. My vision faded to black, and I felt myself falling into an emptiness I can't quite describe. Weightless, yet intensely aware. But what happened next is the part that still haunts me. I realized with utter clarity that I was outside my body. I saw myself slumped over my desk, my face ashen, while the room around me glowed with a strange golden light. The details were sharper than anything I'd ever experienced in waking life. I felt no pain, only a deep curiosity, and underneath it all, a rising sense of anticipation. In that suspended moment, time had no meaning. I sensed a presence beside me, gentle but powerful, as if someone, or something, was waiting. It was then that I understood. My life was no longer in my own hands. I had crossed a threshold, and what I was about to see would change not only my life, but perhaps the lives of many others. I wanted desperately to return, to shout for help, to reach back through the veil to my classroom, my students, and my family. But I couldn't move. All I could do was watch and wait as my journey into the unknown truly began. Crossing over. The start of the NDE time lost all meaning as I drifted away from my body. The silence was deep, like standing in the middle of a vast, empty cathedral. I felt weightless, suspended somewhere between worlds. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly untethered. No heartbeat, no breath, no pain. Just consciousness. At first, I was terrified. I could see my own body, motionless at my desk, my skin turning pale. Teachers and staff rushed in, shouting my name, calling for help, but I could no longer reach them. Their voices sounded muffled, as if coming through thick glass. The panic and chaos that erupted in the classroom seemed far away, like a scene from a play that I could only observe, not join. Slowly, the fear began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. I started to notice things I'd never seen before. Vibrant colors swirling around people, like gentle auras, shimmering with their emotions. I saw a child's spirit glowing bright yellow with curiosity, a teacher's aura trembling with fear, another staff member wrapped in a cloud of frantic prayer. I realized I wasn't just seeing the world as I used to. I was perceiving a layer of reality that had always existed, just beyond the reach of ordinary sight. Then, something extraordinary happened. A tunnel of light began to form in front of me, spiraling gently, warm and inviting. I felt pulled toward it, not forced, but guided, as if invisible hands were gently leading me forward. The light was alive, filled with a peace that words cannot truly capture. Every worry, every regret, every ounce of fear began to melt away as I floated closer. Inside the tunnel, I was greeted by memories from my own life. Moments I'd forgotten, faces I hadn't seen in years, flashes of kindness and laughter, mistakes and heartbreaks, all woven together in a tapestry that seemed to pulse with meaning. It was as if I was being shown the story of my soul. Every act of love, every time I offered a gentle word or a helping hand, every moment I had chosen compassion over anger. Even the smallest choices sparkled with importance in this place. And yet, I wasn't alone. I felt a presence, vast, loving, endlessly patient, walking with me through my memories. Though I couldn't see him clearly yet, I knew in my heart that this was someone holy, someone I had longed for all my life. There was no condemnation here, only love and understanding. I sensed that every pain, every failure, was being seen through eyes of infinite mercy. Suddenly, I was standing at the edge of the tunnel, facing a brilliant light so pure it was almost impossible to look at. It was brighter than the sun, but it didn't hurt my eyes. Instead, the light felt like an embrace, warm, familiar, deeply comforting. All I wanted was to step into that light, to let it fill me completely. I felt myself begin to weep, not out of sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of the love I felt pouring over me. It was then that the presence in the light spoke, not with words, but directly into my heart. Every question I'd ever had melted away. All that mattered was this love, this peace, this impossible joy. For the first time, I truly understood what it means to belong, to be fully known, fully accepted, and completely loved. And in that holy silence, I realized something else. This was only the beginning. What I was about to see would not just change me. It was meant for everyone, especially you, watching this now. The encounter with Jesus. Standing at the edge of that radiant tunnel, with the light wrapping around me like the gentlest embrace, I felt the atmosphere change. The silence grew deeper, almost reverent, as if every atom was holding its breath. I became aware that I was not alone, not just in the sense of a distant presence, but someone was truly, physically there with me in that place between worlds. At first, I saw only the light, brighter than anything I could have imagined. It shimmered and pulsed, alive with a love that filled every part of me. As my spirit adjusted, I began to discern a figure stepping forward, out of the brilliance. His outline was clear, but at the same time, he was cloaked in a glory too magnificent for human eyes to fully understand. And then, he smiled. In that single moment, I recognized him. Not from paintings, not from stories or the sermons I'd half listened to as a child, but in a way so personal and true that every doubt and fear I'd ever had dissolved. It was Jesus. There was no question, no hesitation. I knew him the way you know your own heartbeat, your own laughter. He was familiar and yet beyond anything I could have dreamed. His eyes, oh, his eyes. They held the deepest ocean, endless galaxies, and at the same time, an intimacy that saw right through to my soul. When he looked at me, I felt as though I was the only person in all creation, completely known and yet completely loved. It was as if he had been waiting for me with a patience that spanned eternity. He reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm, solid, more real than anything I'd ever felt before. All my shame, every regret, every secret I'd ever carried seemed to melt away in that touch. Tears flowed down my face, but they were tears of release, of relief, of finally coming home. He spoke, but not with words. His voice was a melody, a vibration that resonated inside my chest, each phrase washing over me like waves. You are not alone, you have never been alone. Those words echoed through me, peeling away layers of loneliness I never even knew I carried. I tried to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but my words dissolved in the light. Instead, every answer I'd ever needed was poured into me like water into an empty cup. He walked with me along the edge of that radiant realm. Around us, colors bloomed and danced. Sounds shimmered like music, and time unraveled into a tapestry of eternity. I saw faces, my grandmother, friends I had lost, even children I'd once taught who had passed away. They were joyful, radiant, waving as if to say, "We are all alive, we are all here." The separation between worlds was only an illusion. Jesus turned to me, his expression gentle and serious, and in that moment I felt the weight of what he was about to share. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and the entire universe seemed to pause. "Julia, I brought you here for a reason. What you are about to see is not just for you. It is for every soul who longs for light in the coming darkness." I felt a sudden tremor in my spirit, a sense of urgency, but not fear. I knew something monumental was about to be revealed, something that would change the lives of those who would listen. I clung to his presence like a child holding her father's hand, trusting, hoping, praying I would understand. And then the scene around us began to shift, as if the very fabric of the spiritual world was opening to show me visions that I was meant to carry back. Visions of a world shrouded in darkness, of humanity on the edge, and a message of hope that would pierce even the deepest night. Before the visions began, Jesus spoke one last time, his voice gentle but filled with power. "Fear not, for even in the darkest hour my light will never leave you." And with that, the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness began to unfold before my eyes. The prophetic vision, 3 days of darkness, begin. As Jesus released his hand from my shoulder, the radiant realm around us seemed to dissolve, as if a veil was being pulled away to reveal a new reality. Suddenly, I was no longer in that place of shimmering light and comfort. I found myself standing above the earth, looking down at our world from a perspective that was both impossibly vast and intimately detailed. I could see continents, oceans, cities, people moving about their daily lives, utterly unaware of what was about to unfold. The air grew cold. A heavy silence blanketed the earth, pressing down with a weight that was almost suffocating. In an instant, the sun itself seemed to flicker and then disappear. What followed was a darkness deeper than any night I had ever known, thick, inky, and absolute. Not just an absence of sunlight, but a swallowing void that seemed to consume even hope itself. Streetlights failed. The glow of cities was snuffed out. Homes, hospitals, and churches, everywhere, were engulfed in a supernatural blackness. It was not only the absence of light that struck terror into humanity's heart, but the sudden severing of every connection. Electronic devices went dead. Cell phones, radios, and televisions became useless, as if the very pulse of technology had been silenced. The world's great networks, communication, electricity, information, all collapsed in a single, unimaginable moment. People cried out for answers, reaching for each other in confusion and fear. But their voices were swallowed by the darkness. Panic swept across nations. I saw scenes play out in flashes, families huddling together in living rooms trying to light candles that would not burn, people pounding on neighbors' doors desperate for any sign of hope, leaders of countries speaking into silent microphones, their words lost in the void. Some tried to escape, running out into the streets, but the darkness outside was so thick it felt alive, cold, suffocating, and impenetrable. Others fell to their knees, praying, weeping, searching for any glimmer of comfort. But then, the vision shifted, and Jesus stood beside me once more, not in the distance, but so close I could feel his presence like a shield. He spoke softly, his words carrying through the chaos. "These are the days when faith will be tested. Do not trust your eyes, for what you see is not the truth. Trust my voice and my promise." As he spoke, I saw that the darkness wasn't only physical, it was spiritual, a shadow that crept into hearts and minds, planting seeds of despair and anger. Arguments erupted between friends and families. Old wounds, once hidden, now festered in the absence of light. I saw people giving in to hopelessness, while others, clutching Bibles, whispering prayers, seemed to radiate a faint glow, as if their faith itself became a lamp in the blackness. Then I was shown something even more chilling. In certain places, the darkness took on a shape, moving, twisting, whispering lies into people's ears. It felt as though forces of evil were unleashed, prowling through the night, seeking those whose hearts had no anchor. I saw shadows knocking at windows, pressing against doors, trying to enter homes where fear had already taken root. In those places where anger and unbelief reigned, the shadows grew bold. But there were other scenes too, softer, yet even more powerful. In a small house, a mother gathered her children and knelt with them in prayer, her voice steady even as the darkness pressed in. In a hospital room, nurses lit a single candle and joined hands, reciting the Lord's Prayer as the shadows shrank from the edges of the light. In churches, a remnant of believers lifted their voices in hymns, and their faith formed a barrier, keeping the blackness at bay. All the while, Jesus remained by my side, his light undimmed. He looked at me, his eyes fierce with compassion. "Tell them," he said, that the darkness will not last forever. It will rage, it will terrify, but it cannot overcome those who hold fast to my name. The faithful will be my light bearers, and through them, hope will survive the night. I saw the earth spinning slowly through this endless night. 3 days passed, though time felt distorted, stretching, contracting, as if each hour was an eternity. Those who clung to faith grew stronger, their hearts shining even brighter against the blackness. But those who let fear take over lost themselves, their cries fading into silence. On the third day, just when the world seemed lost, I saw a distant glow on the horizon. The darkness began to break apart, slowly, almost reluctantly, as dawn prepared to return. Tears streamed down my face as I witnessed the first rays of light pierce the void. Weak at first, but growing, spreading, unstoppable. Humanity, battered but not destroyed, began to emerge from the shadows, changed by what they had endured. And then, as the vision faded, Jesus turned to me one final time in that place. "This is my warning, but also my promise," he said. "Darkness may fall, but my light is eternal. Tell them to prepare, not only with their hands, but with their hearts." With those words, I was pulled back from the vision, left with a sense of awe and trembling responsibility. I knew that this message was not just for me, but for every soul longing for hope in a world that sometimes feels so close to the edge. Scenes from the darkness. Humanity in crisis. In the vision, Jesus allowed me to see through walls and across continents. It was as if I was moving, sometimes slowly, sometimes instantly, from one city to another, from crowded urban apartments to isolated rural homes, witnessing the countless ways people responded to the suffocating darkness. Each scene etched itself into my memory, a mosaic of human crisis, fear, and, in some places, astonishing faith. In a gleaming high-rise in New York City, a young woman named Samantha pressed herself against the window, desperate to see any sign of dawn. Her phone had died hours before. She paced the room, fighting a rising sense of panic, her mind replaying news headlines and wild rumors about what was happening. Somewhere below, she heard sirens, then nothing but silence. Samantha's roommate wept quietly in the dark, clutching a rosary she hadn't used since childhood. When Samantha asked what she was doing, her roommate whispered, "I'm praying. It's all we have left." That night, for the first time in years, Samantha joined her. Across the country, in a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, a family sat huddled in their living room, surrounded by half-melted candles and fading flashlights. The father, David, tried to reassure his children, telling them that everything would be all right. But as the hours stretched on, his own fear grew. When his teenage son, overwhelmed by hopelessness, began to shout and blame him for not being prepared, David nearly broke. Yet, in that moment, he remembered his own childhood prayers. With trembling hands, he led his family in reciting Psalm 23, his voice steadying with every line. The children grew calm, the shouting faded, and the darkness seemed just a little less thick. In rural Nebraska, a farmer named Bill sat alone at his kitchen table, a battered Bible open before him. He had always prided himself on self-reliance, on never needing anyone's help. But in the third night of unending darkness, the loneliness pressed down with crushing force. Bill found himself weeping, not from fear, but from the ache of being truly alone. As he prayed for strength, he felt a strange warmth fill the room, as if invisible arms wrapped him in a comfort he hadn't known since he was a child. In Chicago, gangs roamed the streets in the pitch black, taking advantage of the chaos. Looting and violence erupted, fueled by desperation and fear. Yet, in the midst of it all, a young mother named Rosa gathered her neighbors in the basement of their apartment building. She offered food, warmth, and, above all, words of hope. Rosa's voice cut through the terror. "This darkness will not last. We are not alone. God is with us, even here." Slowly, the fear in the room lessened, replaced by something stronger, a flicker of courage and unity. In a small hospital in Atlanta, doctors and nurses worked by the dim glow of battery-powered lanterns, tending to patients whose suffering only deepened in the absence of light. The staff, exhausted and overwhelmed, began to lose hope. But one nurse, Mary, moved from room to room, praying quietly for each patient, laying gentle hands on their foreheads. Word spread through the hospital that Mary's prayers seemed to bring peace, even to the most desperate cases. Doctors who had scoffed at faith now joined her, desperate for anything that could ease the suffering. In that place, faith and medicine became one, On the outskirts of Seattle, a group of teenagers separated from their families by the blackout took shelter in an abandoned church. At first, they mocked and joked, trying to push away their fear. But as the hours dragged on and the darkness pressed closer, one of them remembered a hymn his grandmother used to sing. Hesitant at first, then louder, the group began to sing together, their voices rising and echoing in the empty sanctuary. In the cold and dark, music became their lifeline, a fragile, defiant act of hope. But I also saw scenes of utter despair. In a luxury penthouse in Miami, a wealthy businessman sat alone, surrounded by the trappings of his success. Gold watches, priceless art, and imported wine offered no comfort. He screamed at the darkness, cursing God and fate, demanding answers. But the darkness only deepened, and his anger turned to sobs. His money and power were useless here. Only faith, which he'd spent a lifetime mocking, had the power to break through. In rural Alabama, an elderly woman sat by her window, staring into the abyss outside. She had lost her husband and children years ago, and had lived in isolation ever since. As the darkness stretched on, she wondered if she would survive, but she remembered the words her mother had spoken to her as a girl. No darkness lasts forever. Light always returns. With trembling hands, she lit a single candle and began to pray. And though the darkness raged outside, inside her little home, a quiet peace began to grow. All across the world, I saw that the darkness brought out both the best and the worst in people. In some, it unleashed long-buried anger, jealousy, and violence. In others, it awakened love, faith, and unimaginable courage. Strangers became family. Enemies became allies. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the forgotten, all were brought to the same level, united by a single, desperate question. Would the light ever return? And always, I saw Jesus moving quietly among the people, sometimes visible, sometimes only a comforting presence. Wherever faith was found, no matter how small, the darkness lost its grip. Every whispered prayer, every act of kindness, every song of hope became a spark that pushed back against the night. As I watched these scenes unfold, I realized that the crisis was not just about survival, it was a test of the heart. In the absence of all that we cling to for security, what remains? What do we turn to when all else is stripped away? I saw the truth, clear and undeniable. In the deepest darkness, the smallest light shines brightest. A message of protection, light in the darkness. As the vision deepened, Jesus gently turned my attention away from the turmoil and fear to something utterly miraculous. Amid the crushing blackness, I began to notice small points of light. At first faint, like stars appearing in a midnight sky, then brighter, multiplying and spreading across the map of the world. These lights appeared wherever people gathered to pray, to comfort one another, or to stand firm in faith. Their glow pierced the darkness, creating pockets of warmth and hope that no shadow could cross. Jesus spoke again, his voice full of tenderness and authority. Tell them, the only true refuge is faith. Physical preparations have value, but it is faith, living, trusting, enduring, that will shield my people in the hour of trial. He allowed me to witness what this looked like in real lives. In a cramped apartment in Philadelphia, a grandmother named Estelle gathered her grandchildren around a tiny oil lamp. She read aloud from her Bible, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Every time she spoke the name of Jesus, the lamp seemed to burn a little brighter. When fear threatened to overwhelm the children, she led them in singing hymns, their young voices weaving a tapestry of faith that pushed the shadows away. In Houston, Texas, a small church became a sanctuary for dozens of neighbors, all gathered in silent prayer. As the darkness pressed in, some wept and others trembled, but the pastor reminded them, God's light is not like the world's light. His presence is with us even now. We must hold on to him, no matter what we see or feel. As they prayed, a gentle warmth filled the sanctuary, a supernatural peace that calmed every anxious heart. In Detroit, a single mother named Angela, alone with her 2 sons, remembered the words her own mother had told her. Anoint your doors and windows with oil and pray for God's protection. Desperate, she found cooking oil in her kitchen and made the sign of the cross on her front door, whispering a prayer for protection. To her amazement, the air in her home changed. Fear receded, and a quiet assurance settled over her little family. In a remote village in Montana, a group of friends, unable to reach their families or even call for help, formed a circle in the living room. Each person shared their fears, their hopes, and finally, their prayers. As the group began to pray aloud, one after another, a radiant glow filled the room. not seen with their eyes, but felt in their spirits. Later, they would all describe the same thing, a presence so real, so powerful, that they knew they were not alone. And there were stories of miracles, unexplainable acts of protection that defied logic. A woman in New Orleans awoke in the darkness to hear voices whispering outside her door. Shadows moved in the hallway, and she felt a cold terror clutch at her heart. Remembering a story from her grandmother, she grabbed her Bible and began to read Psalm 91 aloud, over and over, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. With each word, she felt the darkness retreat, as if invisible walls were rising to protect her home. In Seattle, a group of college students who had never prayed before gathered around a flickering candle, holding hands and stumbling through the Lord's Prayer. As they spoke, the candle stopped sputtering and flared to life, shining with a steady glow until the third day ended. But Jesus also showed me warnings. Those who mocked or rejected faith, clinging only to their possessions or their own strength, found no comfort in the darkness. Their fear became anger. Their anger became despair. Some screamed at the night. Others fell into hopelessness or violence. The difference between those consumed by fear and those protected by faith was as clear as night and day. Jesus' message was unwavering. It is not the size of your faith, but its sincerity. Even the smallest spark can drive back the greatest darkness. Speak my name, trust in my love, let your heart be my lamp. He showed me people who had no religious background, atheists, doubters, those hurt by the church, who simply cried out, "God, if you're real, help me." In every case, light broke through, and peace settled on their spirits. It wasn't about perfect prayers or rituals, but the simple, desperate act of reaching out for God. I saw angels, vast, powerful, and full of light, stationed outside homes, hospitals, and churches where people prayed. Their presence was felt more than seen, but their effect was undeniable. Demonic forces prowled outside, whispering lies and trying to stir terror, but they could not cross the threshold where faith was present. Every whispered prayer, every verse recited in the dark, every act of kindness was a barrier the darkness could not penetrate. The message burned in my heart with urgent clarity. Faith is the shield. Prayer is the weapon. Love is the lamp. No matter how overwhelming the darkness, those who clung to Jesus, no matter how shaky their hands or faltering their voices, found themselves wrapped in an invisible protection, guarded not just from the darkness outside, but from despair within. And through it all, Jesus' presence never wavered. He walked among the hurting, the doubting, the terrified, offering hope and peace to all who would receive it. Spiritual warfare. During the darkness, as I continued to witness the 3 days of darkness, Jesus opened my eyes to a reality most people never see. Beyond the panic, beyond the physical world, a great spiritual battle was raging, a war for the hearts and souls of every man, woman, and child. The darkness was more than the absence of light. It was alive, hungry, and intent on devouring hope. In this dimension, the laws of nature bent and broke. I saw spiritual forces moving through the world, some luminous, radiant with the glory of God, others twisted and cold, exuding a hatred that chilled even my soul. These forces clashed in homes, hospitals, prisons, shelters, wherever people faced the darkness and their deepest fears. In the heart of New Orleans, a young woman named Tamika knelt in her kitchen, trembling as shadows clawed at her windows. She could feel an evil presence lurking just outside, whispering doubts and fears into her mind. "You're alone. No one is coming. God has abandoned you." But Tamika refused to listen. She pressed her hands over her ears and began to sing an old gospel song her grandmother had taught her. The melody filled the room, shaky at first, then strong as a trumpet. Instantly, the shadows recoiled, writhing and retreating into the night, unable to cross the threshold of her faith. In a San Francisco apartment, a group of friends sat in a circle, their hands tightly clasped. Some had never prayed before. As the darkness pressed in, one of them, Ethan, whispered, "God, if you're there, please help us." Suddenly, the room filled with a presence, gentle but powerful. They couldn't see the angels, but I could. Towering beings of light stationed at every door and window, their swords blazing, shielding the friends from the howling spirits outside. Jesus explained to me that every act of faith, no matter how small, was a signal flare in the spiritual realm, a declaration of belonging to the light. These moments drew angels near and gave them permission to fight on our behalf. At the same time, every surrender to despair, every word of hatred or bitterness, fed the darkness and invited it closer. I saw demonic entities, shape-shifting shadows, with eyes like burning coals, prowling the streets and alleys, seeking entry into homes and hearts. They whispered lies, resurrected old wounds, twisted memories, and tried to stoke division. Families who gave in to anger and accusation found the darkness pressing harder against their doors. Those who forgave, who clung to love, saw the darkness retreat. In a small town in Kentucky, a father and son who hadn't spoken in years found themselves trapped together by the blackout. At first, they shouted and blamed each other for old mistakes. The air grew colder, the darkness heavier, but then the son, voice shaking, apologized and hugged his father. In that moment, a warm light flooded the room, banishing the suffocating gloom. Unseen by them, an angel stood with arms outstretched, holding back the enemy. In a Florida prison, inmates locked in their cells wailed and cursed the darkness. Some fell into hopelessness, others turned violent. But in one cell, an old man knelt by his bed, hands lifted to heaven, praying for those around him. Slowly, the cries of rage quieted, and a deep peace settled over that cell block. Even the guards sensed something different and sat silently, heads bowed. The darkness in that place loosened its grip. I realized that this was the true battleground. Not outside, but inside every person. The forces of light and darkness warred over every thought, every decision, every whispered prayer. In the invisible realm, the angels fought valiantly for every soul who called on God, never abandoning those who reached for the light, no matter how feeble their grasp. Jesus showed me scenes of victory that seemed impossible by human standards. A homeless man in Detroit sharing his last scrap of food with a frightened child. A nurse in Boston singing hymns over unconscious patients as the darkness raged outside. A teenager in Denver texting out Bible verses until his phone died, his messages comforting dozens. In each of these acts, no matter how small, the darkness was pushed back. I saw with perfect clarity, the real war was not for cities or power, but for the very soul of humanity. Jesus' voice resonated in my spirit, firm and compassionate. Tell them, my angels are ready to fight for all who choose me, even in the darkness. You are never outnumbered. When you call on my name, the armies of heaven move to defend you. But he also warned, there is no neutral ground. To choose despair is to let the darkness in. Even a simple prayer, even a cry for help opens the way for my light. Do not wait until you are strong. Call on me in your weakness, and you will see miracles. Through it all, I understood. This was not just a prophecy of terror, but an invitation to victory. No matter how thick the darkness, the smallest act of faith, the gentlest word of forgiveness, and the humblest prayer could unleash heaven's armies and transform despair into hope. As the battle raged, it became clear. Those who stood in faith were not alone. They were never alone. The dawn after darkness, a new era, begins. On the third day, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the world holding its breath. The darkness was at its thickest. A heavy blanket pressed against every window, every soul. People everywhere were exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Some had not slept for days, haunted by nightmares and fears. Many had come to the end of themselves, their strength long gone, surviving only on hope and prayer. But then, something shifted. In the vision, I felt it first as a tremor, a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the air, as if the universe itself was exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. The darkness, which had felt so solid and eternal, began to thin at the edges. At first, it was almost unnoticeable, a faint grayness where before there had been only black. But that faint gray grew steadily, like dawn pressing against the night. I watched as, all over the world, people sensed the change even before they could see it. In a cramped apartment in Chicago, a young girl clung to her mother and whispered, "Mama, I think it's almost over." In a tiny house in rural Tennessee, a farmer's wife sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide with hope. In Sao Paulo, Nigeria, Poland, India, across nations and cultures, a single prayer went up: "Let there be light." Suddenly, a sliver of golden light pierced the horizon. It was weak at first, but it shimmered with a power that sent the shadows fleeing in panic. I heard a sound like 1,000 voices rising in a single shout of joy. Tears filled my eyes as the first rays of sunlight streamed through broken windows, cracked doors. The faces of those who had endured now shining with a hope so fierce it was almost painful to witness. Families ran outside, laughing and crying, reaching for each other and for the sky. Old enemies embraced, forgetting the grudges that had once seemed so important. Neighbors who had once ignored each other gathered in the streets, sharing food and stories of survival. All over the world, communities formed around those who had prayed together, wept together, and believed together. But something had changed. not just outside, but inside. The darkness had stripped away so many illusions, all the false securities and distractions. What remained was raw, real, and precious. Faith, love, and a sense of shared humanity. I saw children who had never known prayer leading their parents and giving thanks. I saw hardened men kneeling in the streets, overcome by gratitude. Hospitals became places of celebration, with doctors and nurses hugging patients who had survived not only sickness, but also the terror of the 3 days. Jesus stood beside me in the vision, his face radiant with joy and compassion. He showed me that, in this new era, those who had chosen faith, no matter how small, became beacons of light to their communities. People sought them out for wisdom, comfort, and hope. The churches were filled, not out of fear, but from a genuine hunger for truth and connection. I saw miracles of reconciliation, fathers reunited with sons, sisters forgiving each other, wounds, emotional and spiritual, that had festered for years suddenly healed. And there was a new humility, a new reverence for life. The wealthy shared with the poor, the powerful listened to the weak. It was not a utopia. There was still struggle and pain, but the world was gentler, kinder, and more aware of its desperate need for something greater than itself. Most powerful of all, I saw the legacy of the darkness. For generations to come, people would tell their children and grandchildren of the time when the whole world went dark, and only faith could keep the light burning. They would pass on stories of miracles, of angelic interventions, of prayers answered in the deepest night. The world, marked by the memory of those days, would never be the same. Jesus spoke to me then, his words echoing in the chambers of my heart. The darkness is not the end, but a beginning. Those who walk through it with me will become the dawn bringers in a world desperate for hope. Tell them, the time to choose light is now. Let them be my witnesses to a new era of grace. As I watched the sun rise higher and higher, flooding the earth with warmth and color, I felt a surge of hope stronger than anything I had ever known. The message was clear. No matter how deep the darkness, the light will always return for those who do not give up. And as the vision faded, I knew my life, and the life of everyone who hears this story, was changed forever. As the vision drew to its close, I felt a heaviness settle over my spirit. Not of fear, but of responsibility. The things I had witnessed were not given to me for comfort or curiosity. They were a call, a warning, a lifeline thrown into a storm. The message was clear. We cannot afford to ignore what is coming, or to hope that faith can wait until a more convenient time. I saw Jesus turn to me, his eyes filled with both sorrow and fierce love. His voice carried the weight of eternity. Julia, do not let this vision remain a secret. Speak it boldly, for there are many who will only believe if they hear it from one who has seen. The darkness is not only a prophecy of coming days, but a mirror showing what is already growing in the hearts of humanity. Tell them, the hour is later than they think. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. Jesus showed me millions of people, young and old, rich and poor, from every nation, standing at a crossroads. Some were distracted by the constant noise of the world, scrolling endlessly, numbed by entertainment or worry, never stopping to consider their souls. Others stood in churches with hearts grown cold, going through motions but living without real faith. There were even those who once believed but had turned away, disillusioned by pain or the hypocrisy of others. And then there were the ones who trembled on the edge, hungry for something real, desperate for hope, longing for light, but unsure if God could love someone as broken as they felt. To all of them, this message is for you. This is not a time to delay. The vision showed me how easy it is to be lulled into spiritual sleep by the comforts of the world. But the 3 days of darkness are coming, not just as an event in the future, but as a spiritual reality that sweeps through families, communities, and nations. The darkness grows wherever fear, hatred, and unbelief are allowed to take root. And when the hour strikes, it will be too late to build faith overnight. Jesus is calling us, now, to prepare. Prepare your heart before you stock your shelves. Practice forgiveness before you store up supplies. Teach your children to pray before you teach them to fear. Reach out to those you have wronged and let go of grudges that poison your soul. Start small. Read the Psalms aloud, gather your loved ones even if they laugh or roll their eyes, and pray together. If you have never prayed, simply call out to Jesus. He is closer than your next breath. I saw homes where parents, unsure and hesitant, knelt in the darkness with their children and said, God, we don't know what to do, but we trust you. That humble act, more than any preparation, created a shield stronger than steel. I saw the faith of one old woman, praying by herself in the night, lighting an entire street with hope. I saw a teenager, mocked by friends for her faith, praying quietly in her room and unknowingly saving her whole family. But the vision also revealed what happens when we delay. I saw people clinging to wealth, to politics, to science, to their own intellect. None of it was enough. In the hour of crisis, only faith endured. Only faith survived. The darkness exposed what was real and what was an illusion. Jesus' promise is not that we will escape trouble, but that we will never face it alone. His presence is the light that darkness cannot overcome. His angels are already watching over those who seek him, even now. So this is my plea to you, not just as a warning, but as a gift. Prepare your spirit. Take faith seriously, even if you have only a mustard seed of belief. Let go of bitterness and pride. Forgive those who have hurt you and ask for forgiveness yourself. Pray for your family, your neighbors, your city. Be a light, even in small ways. Share a kind word, an encouraging text, an act of service. Trust Jesus even if you don't understand everything. Open your Bible, especially the Psalms and the Gospels. Let those words fill your home. Gather with others, even just one or two, and pray for God's protection. The world will scoff. Many will mock. Some will ignore this message, convinced they have time. But to those who listen, who take action, who say yes to Jesus, no darkness will ever be able to destroy you. As the vision ended, I felt a new strength, a courage that was not my own. I knew that my mission was not simply to survive, but to invite others into the hope and the light I was shown. That invitation is for you, right now. The 3 days of darkness will come, but so will the dawn. Will you be ready? Will your heart be filled with light, or will you be swept away by fear? Choose today. Reach out to Jesus. Prepare, not just your home, but your soul.